Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into one of the absolute most pivotal, incredibly complex, and honestly, deeply human events in modern history. The year is 1947. This was the exact moment when the massive territory of British India was officially split into two brand new independent nations, India and Pakistan. The sheer scale of this event is kind of hard to wrap your head around, but today we're going to break down exactly how this all went down, step by step.
Crowded trains, divided families, millions forced to just up and leave their homes. In 1947, the world witnessed what was literally one of the largest mass migrations in all of human history. And looking at that, it immediately begs some massive questions. Why did this happen? Was a split of this magnitude entirely inevitable? And looking past the high-level geopolitics, how did this massive shift actually affect the ordinary folks who were living right in the middle of it? Well, we're going to explore the story behind one of the most game-changing events in South Asian history to find out.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we're going to look at rising nationalism, then differing visions, move into the road to partition, check out the tragic human cost, and finally wrap up with lessons for the future. Part 1. Rising nationalism under British rule. So to really grasp 1947, we have to jump back in time to the early 1900s. The region was fully under British rule, but demands for self-government were really starting to accelerate. People wanted to say in their own future, naturally. And as these demands grew, major political organizations stepped up to represent different interests across the subcontinent. First up, the Indian National Congress emerged, and they quickly became a huge driving force in the push for independence. A bit later, the All India Muslim League was formed, specifically aiming to represent the political concerns of the region's Muslim population. But, as these groups grew, the whole conversation got a lot more complicated. The core political debates really intensified over exactly how different communities were going to be fairly represented in a newly independent India. While a lot of leaders were all in on the idea of one united nation, there were equally strong concerns from others about necessary political safeguards. They essentially wanted an ironclad guarantee that minority groups would have real representation and protection built right into a new government framework. Part 2. Differing visions for India. Now, what's really interesting about this is how these debates over representation were championed by leaders with completely different ideas of what the future should look like. On one hand, you had Mahatma Gandhi. He deeply believed that people of different religions could, and absolutely should, live together in one united nation. His whole emphasis was entirely on nonviolence, cooperation, and keeping communal harmony. But on the other hand, Muhammad Ali Jinnah had a really fascinating political evolution. He actually started out supporting cooperation between communities. But as the political landscape shifted, he began arguing that Muslims needed much stronger political protections. Over time, that vision shifted, and he became the main advocate for a totally separate nation, Pakistan. It is super important to remember, though, that these leadership differences weren't just happening in a vacuum. They were a direct reflection of these massive, incredibly complex political debates going on across the entire country. This wasn't just some personal disagreement between two guys at the top. Various leaders, huge political parties, and diverse communities everywhere all had differing and often conflicting opinions about India's future. Part 3. The road to partition. Okay, fast forward a bit. Following World War II, Britain was economically and politically weakened, and they planned to leave India. This led to deeply intensified negotiations with Indian leaders to figure out an exit strategy. But despite throwing several proposals on the table, severe disagreements remained over the solutions. The leaders just couldn't find common ground. Tragically, as this political deadlock dragged on, communal tensions on the ground skyrocketed in some regions, leading to horrible unrest and violence. Finally, seeing virtually no other viable path forward, British authorities dropped a bombshell announcement, the official plan to divide British India into two distinct independent nations, India and Pakistan. Part 4. The tragic human cost. Let's move to and see how this builds. Because up until now, we've really just been looking at the macro-level politics. But down on the ground, the reality was absolutely staggering. Millions of ordinary people suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of a brand newly drawn border. They gathered whatever they could carry and crossed those borders in a totally desperate search for safety and a new home. When we say migrants here, we're talking about families who had to completely abandon houses they'd built over a lifetime. We're talking about leaving behind family businesses, generational memories tied directly to the land, and perhaps most heartbreakingly, loved ones in separated communities. Imagine communities of different faiths that had literally lived side by side in harmony for generations, suddenly and violently being torn apart.
So for ordinary citizens, partition definitely wasn't just some distant political event happening in a faraway Capitol building. It was a profoundly life-changing reality. Every single day became marked by immense uncertainty, heartbreaking loss, and incredibly difficult forced choices about where to go and who you could actually trust.
Part 5. Lessons for the Future. The events of 1947 aren't just, gathering dust in some old history book. They matter deeply to us today. Scholars are still closely examining the political decisions and social conditions of this era because it really helps us appreciate the immense complexity of nation building. It is literally never easy or simple. It also really puts a spotlight on the critical importance of continuous dialogue and compromise, especially during times of deep disagreement, because when dialogue breaks down, the consequences can be incredibly severe. Above all, it forces us to remember the millions of ordinary lives that were changed forever just by lines drawn on a map.
So as we look back, we really have to ask ourselves, what can future generations learn from this exact chapter of history? When we unpack those high-level geopolitical chess moves and weigh them against that staggering human cost we just talked about, what are the real takeaways for how we conduct our politics and, frankly, how we treat our neighbors today?
History teaches us not only what happened, but why it happened, and how we can build a better future. The roots of the 1947 partition show us both the failures of leadership and, honestly, the incredible resilience of ordinary people. But it leaves us with this one critical question. When modern societies face deep, fundamental disagreements today, have we actually learned how to draw a line without tearing a country apart? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning and keep exploring.